enormously. I think I said that in the speech. If I didn't, I should have. Yeah. But there's a problem, with the evidence-based movement, and it is that that we have no evidence about things we haven't thought of yet. Now, I know Larry Sherman has an idea about how you deal with that, and I think he's a wise guy, so he has some ways to think about it. But I think the problem is that institutionally, when the government says you must be evidence-based, it restricts the whole field of innovation. And we are so far from getting it right. Every idea that I thought was interesting has almost no evidence base.
Right.
And so what I saw was this evidence base, which I thought was filling a void, and I really liked, was also ironically slicing off all my best ideas and saying, you're a wacko. And I suppose in a way I am a wacko, but I wanted to make the point that if we really think that we need something really new, and I truly believe we need something in corrections, then evidence is not going to get us there.
Right. So maybe from that, if you had any advice for young scholars beginning their career or beginning to think about how the shape their careers might take, what advice would you?
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that question. That's a good question. I think it's very hard to be a scholar now. How much harder it was when I started. The expectations are higher. The differences in journals are taken more seriously. You got these people like me being deans and provosts and expecting stuff. So I think it's harder. And you can't actually ignore that if you want a good career. That said, there's nothing better than getting into the field. I like the database people who pull a database and look at correlations and stuff. They're really smart. Many of them are very smart. They do things that are useful. Since I'm not good at that, I actually also a little jealous. But you walk into a place where corrections is being done, and it's different than it's different than a questionnaire. It's different than giving out a questionnaire.
Right.
So I would encourage people. So there's if you want a career, you want to be enthusiastic about what you do, which means I think you want to take risks. Which means I think then you want to really use this thing of tenure, not for the free speech side, but for the idea that you're able to go down a road not knowing where it's leading. We're really, really conservative in this field of scholarship. Everything about a grant. If you want to get a grant funded, you have to know before you do it that it's going to work. Well, no wonder we get all these really very narrow, boring research funded projects funded, not game changer projects funded, because by the time the review process is done, all of the things that might have taken you down a road, you have no idea where it ends up, they've been lopped off. And if you were going to ask a question, you have to be sure you're going to be able to answer that question. There's benefits to that and reasons why we do that, and I get that, but that's so constricting. Almost every really important idea in the field, if you trace it back, comes about from two things going together that nobody expected to put together. Serendipity is a very important principle. But we don't organize the field of inquiry very well to take advantage of serendipity, and we certainly don't in the funding mechanism within the. So if you got the private sector that does funding that already has the answer and wants you to go out and find it, then you got the public sector that is so dependent on being able to actually get an answer that it makes the question so narrow that it becomes uninteresting. And as a consequence, I think innovation is a struggle in our work.
And I know, based on having worked with you on it, that Todd was the founding editor of Criminology and Public Policy. We've done a lot. We haven't talked yet about all your policy work, but I remember as we worked on that journal that you very frequently took a big chance on some of the articles that you would publish, because I distinctly remember as we were working on that you would say, well, if we only publish things that we already know, then we're not going to move this field forward. And in the policy realm, you've got to take some chances. So you have to. So I wondered if you'd speak a little bit about. So we've talked a lot about your practitioner side in a way, about your academic or credential side, and what about the policy world? You do a lot of work in that area, especially more recently.
Yeah, it's funny because I take what you say as right. But I don't think about it that way at all. I don't think that I try to have a policy relevance. I think I'm just built that feels. This is my father.
Mm-hmm.
My father was a socialist. He was kicked out of the country during World War II because he was a pacifist, and went to be a missionary in Peru, and my mother went down there. They were married. Came back, the feds pulled it. Came into Miami. The feds pulled him away for 3 hours for an interrogation when he came in. He was a lefty in the times when lefties were very suspicious. I remember getting crank calls when I was growing up from people, you nigger lover, and we're going to burn a cross in your, we're burn your house down, stuff like that. Growing up in Indiana, and he used to listen to the right-wing radio, and he was to say, because I have to understand what those arguments are if I'm going to deal with them.
And that's what you do now. I remember recently you told me you have been.
And well, because if you don't, in some kind of funny way, think that they are right, then you haven't heard of them. There has to be a way. I call them wackos because it's funny and it's fun, and it's secure and all that stuff. But there's something about that line of argument that I find so distasteful that is right. And if you don't understand the part of it that's right, you're not going to be able to work with the argument at all. And I think that's policy. I think policy is about building things through, this mechanism of finding the right pieces here and the right pieces there. And so I think by how I was raised, naturally there, but I don't think of it merely as policy.
Of yourself as having
No.
policy orientation.
No.
Although I think others would describe you as being a
probably
very
so.
policy oriented type of scholar. What effect do you think, and I could probably answer this question for you, but what effect do you think you've had on the many people that you've mentored over the years?
I hope the most important effect I've had, and I think I have, is that they have fun,
Right,
that they
that's
laugh,
true.
that they make jokes, that they don't take themselves seriously, that the craziness that goes on in academia, the kind of personalities that we tend to produce in our field because of tenure, because of inquiry, because of scholarship, because of the way it works. That we sort of understand the weirdness of it, the oddness of it, take it lightly, and I think that's one thing. I hope I've imparted the idea that personal relationships really matter, and that they're more important actually than science, in my opinion. Science will do what it's going to do, and things that we think are true now, we're going to find out 10 years from now we didn't get right, but relationships will endure, and so and I hope I've done something along those lines.
And you've certainly seen a number of your mentees sort of carry out your research agenda, even when you've moved to other places. If you think about David Card, for example, people who you've worked with over the years who've continued, even though you've moved, progressed, continued your sort of former research agendas, if you want to think of it that way. Would you have done anything differently in your career when you look back? You seem pretty in a happy place. But.
I wake up most mornings and go like, how the hell did this happen? I mean, if I had 20 years ago, somebody had said, ask for whatever you want, you're going to have it. I wouldn't have had the courage, or even the foresight to ask for what's been given to me. So, I think it's ironic. I think the regrets are all personal. I ended up spending a lot of time. I was so. The field was so important to me, and being in the field, and being of the field, that I spent a lot of time traveling and a lot of time away. And I think that produced a burden on my family. And I love my kids; they love me. I have an ex-wife who we get along fine for people who were once married and are divorced. But if I could, I don't know if I'd do anything differently. But there is a regret there that you end up making a decision to emphasize some things and you can't do this. Nina and I often say, every decision is a decision to give up things that would happen if you went down this road. You really can't know what they are. And I'm a very hungry person. I would like to have every experience in life. I wish I could have tried different roads and for longer. But the truth is, once you do something, then you sort of cut off all these other possibilities. So.
Right. And I think that's one of the things you probably impart on your mentees that you may not be as aware of. That that they're, because you have, at least in my experience with you, been very family oriented since I've known you. That those things probably matter. Given some of your mentees, at least the more recent ones, that sense that keep balance in your life instead of.
Oh man, happy beats any other choice.
Yeah.
So I often say that if you're going to ask for something and you don't ask for serenity, you're an idiot. If you ask for money, but serenity would mean you don't have money. It still doesn't matter. You have serenity. I mean, so the thing you really want in life, I want to make the seminal contribution on X, Y, Z, or serenity. Well, you're an idiot if you don't ask for serenity. Because if you're given serenity, nothing else really matters.
Right. You
So-
wouldn't be worried about it. Right. And then, what are some of your general thoughts on the state of where we are in the field today?
Wow. So, when I started doing, I was just reflecting because I'm at this meeting now and I'm about to become a provost, and so I don't know how much I'm going to be at ASC meetings or ACJS meetings. I can't imagine not going. But on the other hand, I have to leave this one early because bosses get on phones and you have things like labor negotiations and all that stuff. So I think that it has surprised me how the field has grown. So I used to go to meetings in the 70s and early 80s, and we used to show up at meetings without a room, and then just find somebody and say, "You got a room? Yeah. Can I crash in your room? Sure." And I won't talk about all the misbehavior that went on because there was a lot of it. It was a field that was like a bunch of cowboys in a funny kind of way, and it's not like that anymore. It's it's more serious. This is not a bad thing. It's just a surprise. I mean, the size of what we do. It's good for us actually. Criminal justice now is on many campuses. One of the most scholarly operations going on in arts and sciences. And I'm very proud of that. So I guess that's a surprise. I'm surprised that it took us so long to wise up about prisons. We knew in the mid-1980s this was stupid.
Right.
Tommy has a great book, smart guy, Tommy. Which is funny because he was the one who wrote the best critique of that, the justice and reinvestment piece I wrote, CPP. It still makes me smile. But Tommy, said, that what we did about sentencing, we knew what it was going to do about racial inequities, and we did it anyway. And that's what is really not what we did. That's bad enough, but that we did it knowing that it was going to have these effects. And no reasonable person could have argued otherwise.
Right.
And I think that we knew that in the 80s. I think that book might have been written in the early 1990s or late 1980s. And look, still we did it anyway. And that's a surprise to me.
Right. And then sort of kind of come full circle. What questions now? You started your career 40 years ago almost. What questions ought we be trying to answer now?
Guns. So I think, I work in Newark, guns really matter there. So I say guns. There's John Farmer, who's the former dean of the law school there, and I've been toying around about writing an editorial, tax guns. Because you could say the Second Amendment allows you to have any gun you want. It's just that if you want an Uzi, it's going to be $3,000 a year. Or you want a cannon. By the way, I looked this up. Cannons are legal. You can own a cannon. For Christ's sake. Just boggles the mind. But so I think guns are an area where I think we really have to get our minds around violence. There is an intergenerational price that does contract, as you and I have argued in the book that just came out. I hope we're right. Then what's going to happen to all these criminal justice programs? It's a really interesting idea. And I think that's going to be a real challenge for us as a field, becoming relevant to not just through growth, but through some other mechanism. And I hope we can rise to the challenge.
And we're actually, just sort of try to wrap up, we're doing this interview at a moment where you are about to become provost at Rutgers Newark campus. And you're really kind of moving out of academia now. What do you see for the sort of the future, your next
My next
5 years? Will we never see Todd clear?
No. I care so much about the social justice aspects of corrections that I can't imagine completely severing those ties. In my work as a provost, I've already brought in the project that I talked about for college education for people who are incarcerated. That project is now moving from the School of Criminal Justice into my provost's office. The Police Institute that does public safety work in our area is moving from the School of Criminal Justice into the provost's office, because those things need to be shepherded, and they need to be they need some careful hands. So I'm going to stay close to those issues. I think that treating people who've been to the criminal justice system as college students rather than felons is the most revolutionary ideal in the world that I've bumped into. It's hard for people to fathom, and we've got people at Rutgers who are doing that. And I think if I can help support that movement through, from a provost point of view, that long after I retire, there will be fruits of that work.
And my final question would be, is there anything I haven't asked you that you wish I had in the course of this?
You didn't ask me to do the Rutgers cheer,
No,
which is, are you rah-rah, are you rah-rah, hoorah, hoorah, Rutgers rah, upstream, red team, upstream, rah, rah, Rutgers rah. And you wouldn't ask.
I wouldn't. You'd have to get up and do it properly.
That's true.
So, thank you so much
It's great
for
talking
joining
to
me
you.
for this interview.
Thank
It was
you.
a lot of fun, as I know.
Thanks.